the code, right? That is really, I believe, the foundation of everything. And I think more occultists would benefit from that than from necessarily learning operative sorcery or all sort of different means of operative sorcery right away. You see people all the time who are in the forums like nerding out on the grimoires or whatever, but their lives are falling apart, you know?
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
if,
yeah.
if you don't know how to aim that magic toward your own self transformation, and then, you're going to save so much time if you align yourself internally with the life that you want first and
Mhm.
then cast for those external things to come to you. Otherwise, you're just going to sabotage it when it comes in, or you're not going to be ready for it, or you're going to be aiming your sorcery at the wrong things. You're going to be aiming it out of like jealousy, or you're going to be, oh, if I only had that, I would feel complete. And then that arrives and it's like, no, now I need something else to fill the void
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah.
So
Hello and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. Today we welcome the incredible Arden Leigh, a true polymath, a deep dive into how their chaos magic underpins their coaching and repatterning work, and how it all weaves together into their music. They're on a mission to help people transform their lives, and in this conversation they'll share how they use these powerful modalities to do just that. In an open and free-flowing conversation, Arden opens up about their fascinating journey, starting with how they combined New Age principles with practical magic to transform life after moving to Los Angeles. Then we take a deep dive into their repatterning project, a powerful method for shifting through thought patterns and beliefs that are maybe holding us back and preventing us from manifesting our desired outcomes, like manifesting the life that we want. And we discuss their personal experiences with trauma, including hypnotic programming, and how they used both magical and mundane approaches to overcome these challenges, emphasizing the importance on taking control of your own mental programming. Arden also shares her fascinating and quite unique career trajectory from being a professional dominatrix in New York City to becoming a successful coach. And they reveal how past traumatic experiences, including being doxxed, had led them to develop clearer boundaries and processes for client interactions. We explore their teaching philosophy, the value of community, and the crucial need for internal alignment before seeking external change. We also share our thoughts on the distractions of modern society and the power of consistency in one's life and one's personal development. Really, in whatever you do. And in the Plus show, we get deeper into all those topics, but we also kind of talk about the direct results of sorcery when it's targeted on oneself and how the results of that can vary and manifest in a very, very real sense. It's all good stuff. So if you want to hear the Plus show, then follow the show notes links below and come and join the Patreon. If that's not your thing and you want to support the show, you can always pick up a copy of my book, Son of the Dark Man, Falls of Witches, Lord of the Crossroads, which you can also find in my link tree. Okay, let's get on with the show. Arden Leigh, you're very welcome to the Spirit Box podcast. Lovely to have you on the show.
thank you so much for having me, Dara. It's an honor. There's so many occultists that I respect who have been on your show, so I'm really excited to tape
Well,
today's
that's really
episode.
kind of you to say so. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Celeste put us in touch. It was brilliant. Always a recommendation from Celeste is something I always take very seriously. So shout out to
I'm
Celeste if
honored.
she's listening.
She's great. She's
Yeah,
incredible.
absolutely. So could you tell us a little bit about you and your practice?
Sure. Thank you for asking. I consider myself a chaos magician. I am, as we were just talking about just before we started recording, I am the spiritual lineage heir to Grant Morrison. And their sole apprentice, and so a lot of my work is informed by the chaos magic principles of ultimately what I care about the most is just what I'm doing get me results.
Mm.
But I'm also in Los Angeles. I've been in Los Angeles for the last decade. In fact, I would say I started practicing magic with any seriousness around the time just after I moved to Los Angeles, and so. Whether I intended it or not, I think a lot of my practice has also been informed by that culture sort of new age principles. But the interesting thing that I've said in a number of interviews before is that the funny thing that happens when you combine new age principles with actual chaos magic technology is you end up casting for a lot of things that are like highest good, collective consciousness, all of those
Right.
principles that the new age community likes to talk about and does not always fully embody. And it actually, it gets you those results. So I always talk about the first 7 years of my practice were really about casting on myself, getting my
Right.
own life into shape. And that is where the crux, the cornerstone of my work, the Repatterning Project, was born out of the idea that you can um, change change your thoughts, change your beliefs for as overused as those phrases tend
Right.
to be.
Right.
That you can, through means whether magical or mundane, you can change the patterns that you have in order to generate the life
Mhm.
that you want. And so that is the cornerstone of my practice, I would say, in a nutshell.
Fantastic. And I was going over your digital spaces and your website, and I found that kind of repattering stuff you're just discussing really interesting, and the kind of premise that you've kind of overlaid there, relayed there, rather, like, is so useful to people. I mean, I think it's one of those things that, like, why people first kind of get into magic, right? To tweak the bits that aren't working for us, in ourselves, so I'm really interested to kind of hear, how does that work for you? How did it evolve for you?
Yeah, thank you. Well, like many folks, I grew up with some pretty intense trauma. And, you get older and you always think like, well, I'm aware of it, so therefore it
Mhm.
didn't affect me, or, well, I'm over it because I'm not
Yeah.
actively thinking about it every day. And you don't realize how these things affect you on an unconscious level, how they inform your behaviors, your decisions, your choices, the
Hmm.
possibilities that you do and do not allow for yourself. And especially as someone who considered herself very smart, because I was growing up, I was a pleasure to have in class, neurodivergent. And so you think that what you know in your mind is the be all and end all. And then you realize like, oh, actually, wait, no, I've been conditioned by my experiences in ways that actually are limiting me. And so
Right.
into my 20s, experiencing extraordinary frustration, extraordinary anxiety, depression, the feeling like I feel like I'm doing everything right. Why is it not working out for me? I'm trying so hard, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm also a survivor of hypnotic programming from my 20s, when I was in a consensual BDSM relationship in which hypnosis was used on me in a manner that
Right.
was consensual, but which I did not understand was going to have long lasting effects,
Right.
years and years after the relationship ended. So moving out to California and beginning to work with a spiritual facilitator who was able to see that programming on me very early on into our work and to help me remove it. And me sort of studying and understanding trauma and beginning to practice chaos magic in that way of like, well, what am I not doing? What am I not getting?
Mhm.
Sigilizing back in 2017, I am in the vibration of my soul's fulfillment. Like, that's not going to make my eyeballs bleed clean out of my head, which they did. All of a sudden, this very, very intense awakening process. And because I'm someone who's very left brained and I think needs to understand things conceptually before they will really, be able to, before I'll be able to really inhabit and embody them. Um, Having that magic show up in the forms of, the body keeps the score, and unbroken brain, and all these amazing texts
Hmm.
speaking about neurodevelopment and how our experiences condition us, and realizing ultimately that the same kind of programming that our abusers can use on us to condition us to their liking, whether that is passively through bad experiences that maybe they don't intend, or whether it is something purposeful such as hypnosis
Right.
that literally is aimed to rewire a person's brain to change their responses and how they
Hmm.
interact with the world and the things that are important or not so important to them, and realizing like if someone else can do that to us, then it stands to reason that we can do it to ourselves. And so
Sure.
that is really for me the reason that I do what I do, and the thing that is most important to me as I walk through the world is being able to embody and share the knowledge that we are the owners of our human operating system. This is our mind body system, is our domain. And so learning to be able to code, right? Learning to be able to program it ourselves so that we can have the internal programming that generates us the life that we want. Yeah, that is that is my mission in the world.
It's fantastic. I mean, I can really see the value of that. Like, and like when I first kind of started working in magic, initially my goal was transformation or evolution or the kind of the life I want, all the kind of standard stuff you'd expect, and it is, um, it is difficult ground to tread, if you're a newbie, because as you kind of alluded to, you can meet people who may have kind of like surreptitious goals and that aren't with people's welfare at their heart, so being able to kind of navigate that, but also kind of work back from it is yeah, really super valuable. So in terms of kind of like the technology, you mentioned magical technology earlier. Like, what's kind of your approach with the repatterning? Oh, excuse me, pardon me.
Uh, for me, for myself, I typically, I use sigil magic for most of what I do. I
Okay,
combine sigil and candle magic.
right,
So even way back in the beginning, the repatterning project was born out of that first handful of sigils that I cast to try and get my life in order.
right.
When it was, I moved out of New York, when I moved to Los Angeles, and New York was sort of the hub of a great deal of my trauma. So in moving to LA, I wanted to start over, and it was sigil magic um, that really brought those things up. So that is what I use personally, and I do
Mhm,
teach that as
mhm.
well. I go over that more in the other course that I teach, Myths and Magic, which is a course in narrative magic and hyper sigils. So of course, if we're going to learn about hyper sigils, we need to know what a sigil is and how to
Mhm,
how to create
mhm.
one, how to launch one. But in terms of repatterning, because I want that course to be accessible to non-magical people as well. So I
Right.
talk about also the mundane ways that we can change these things. So first of all, something like a trauma, a shocking experience, something that is so intense to the system that it can create that new neural pathway or neural
Mhm,
chain right there from that moment. That's one way, but we tend to think of that trauma as being something bad, something traumatic. But equally as powerful sometimes is we can have a corrective experience. We can have an experience that overwrites the trauma.
right.
A lot of folks talk about psychedelics being one. I think psychedelics are great. I've worked with them as well. But I also think that it doesn't have to be that. You can very easily cast a spell for I change this pattern, and then you can have your spirits arrange an experience that is so vastly different from the trauma that set that original pattern that it basically overwrites that code by showing you like, no, things can be different. Someone can show up and be supportive of you, or just, or not want anything from you, or have an agenda, et cetera, et cetera. And it makes it so obvious to you that, yeah, you basically get to have a new way of being after that. But another one that we can use is joining a new peer group, joining a new social circle, because we literally borrow the nervous systems of the people around us. And we have mechanisms within us that, for our survival, cause us to do things that will avoid ostracism, right? Because back in the caveman days, like, ostracism meant certain death. If you didn't have your tribe, you weren't going to survive. So our bodies are still programmed to do that. So if there's something that you want to do or you want to achieve, you need to be around the people who are doing and achieving that thing. And just by osmosis, you will absorb the beliefs that help to facilitate that. There is also just plain old repetition, right? If a trauma or a corrective experience can create that sort of lightning bolt, immediate like path in the forest, repetition is about walking into that forest in the same path every day and slowly building that path over time. It takes longer, but it's also less of a shock to the system. And so for some folks, going more slowly along that line will feel more accessible to them. And then, there's plain old hypnosis. There's whatever bypasses the critical factor. And that could also mean, listening to audios with subliminal messages, or just putting on like, an Abraham Hicks video in the background while you're cleaning your house. If you want to feel more empowered or whatnot, that includes everything that bypasses the critical factor that in our brains that basically says, do I believe this or not believe this? And there's many ways to do that. So I tend to lean more toward teaching those mundane avenues, because again, it's something, especially where mental health is concerned, like the fact that within the mental health field, like quote unquote magical thinking is already thought of something that is unhealthy, that is delusional. I'm careful. which is I mean, it's silly, because of course I'm very much out about being a magician, but I feel like when I teach this, I want people to understand it from a mundane perspective. And then if they're open to that, then it's like, yeah, you can cast to change these things too. That will probably make it show up more quickly, and it'll probably make it show up more effectively because you're doing it intentionally. But there's many ways, both magical and mundane, to rewire the brain.
Fantastic. And I was again looking at your background. You've also got like kind of NLP in there as well. So you're kind of you're looking at things from a number of different angles.
Yeah, I actually got certified in NLP back in my 20s, actually alongside the partner of my, we basically went and got certified in NLP and hypnosis around the same time. Not together. We did two separate programs just for schedule reasons, but yeah, that was back when I thought I was going to be using NLP for like, ooh, sneaky, I'm gonna, I'm gonna slip in those subtle commands or whatever. That, like, when you're in your 20s, that's like a very interesting thing to you, to call that sort of power. And what I ended up learning was I ended up actually just taking responsibility for my communication. And later on, when I moved to Los Angeles and started my practice up again, there were some things from that certification that I remembered but didn't fully understand at that level of development at the time, that when I started casting for my own healing and getting my life together, came up in my mind so clearly and almost deliberately that it very much felt spirit assisted, like spirit being like, hey, do you remember learn this? That's what that means. That's how this applies. And so this, all of a sudden, there being, years later in my life, and just being like, oh. But yeah, neurolinguistic programming is fascinating, because of course it is the idea that we can change our minds via the language we use, right? And this, of course, is what Grant talks about as well in their disinformation keynote speech that you and I were speaking about. That idea of your that there is a code within language, which of course is the foundation of sigil magic as well. that can change reality. And so in NLP, it's about changing the reality of your mind and your way of thinking, or of someone else's mind and their
Mhm.
way of thinking.
Yeah, you can absolutely see how those things are complementary. You know, I I find it absolutely fascinating. I do remember like back when kind of NLP got into, I guess, a bit more kind of like modern youth culture. I put youth in inverted commas, like, because could be 20 years ago or whatever. But
Yeah.
uh, everybody was, who was that way inclined, was certainly trying to kind of like influence people with language. Yeah, I love how you describe that as being that kind of like, the ugabooga power that people were
Yeah.
keen on. But
Yeah. Yep.
it, the whole kind of process of though, like working with yourself to become that the person, or achieve the kind of the life you want. As I said, I find is understandably, really, front of mind for so many people, and particularly people who get into magic or very different spiritual practices. But it certainly can be kind of a bumpy road, and as you kind of I said at the kind of the start of the show, that there's traumas you're aware of, that you become, I guess, familiar with, and recognize those patterns and their influence. But there's ones that are kind of less so, that might be kind of more deep seated, or kind of slower currents, within us. Um, have you had like surprises in that area? Obviously, without getting into being too personal about it, where you kind of start to unpack things, that kind of that kind of Russian doll of influence and subconscious themes in our lives, where the patterning work has helped you kind of get to a place where you're like, oh my god, that's what that is, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, I can think of one very specific example actually. And it came up after, shortly after the 2-year journey that I considered my foundational repatterning, which was between about 2016 and 2018,
Right.
having all of those realizations and epiphanies, and beginning to, um, just put road closed signs on up on all those old neural pathways, and to begin to
Yeah.
carve out new ones. There I was in 2018, and having come out the other side of that journey. It was actually originally, I think, I thought I was going to go into teaching witchcraft, like, super overtly witchy tarot,
Yeah.
kind of thing, like almost like a brand like Celeste does, right?
Right.
And I taught maybe, a sort of introductory magic class back then, just to sort of get my sea legs, because when you destroy your entire life and what has come before, because none of it's working for you, you have to build a new one after that, obviously. And um and it wasn't even really my idea to create the repatterning project. It was actually someone from my social media, basically saying like, hey, we would you ever consider creating a course on your trauma healing, because we
Hmm.
see what you've done. You've been transparent about it in your journey for the past 2 years, and obviously it worked for you. Would you teach a course on that? And I thought, sure, why not?
Yeah.
And I went and I put it together, and I taught it for, think like 495 the very first time that I taught it all the way through. And the folks, and I was just like hoping no one would ask for their money back. And I'm there being like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. And then about 6 months later, the testimonials started coming in. People started coming back and saying, it's been, 6 months or so since I took that course, and my entire life has changed. And like,
That's
everything
brilliant.
is better, everything is different. So
Mm.
from there, I'm like, well, gee, I guess I know what I'm doing with my life now. Like,
Mm.
this is the first time I feel like I've had something that's so important that I really need to treat it well. So I started going to all these business coaching places, right?
Mm.
As one does, right? Into the and I feel like that time in particular, around like 20, between like 2018 and 2020 in particular, was very, like, there was that coaching boom that was happening, and everyone
Right.
wanted you to invest
Yeah.
all this money. So I'm in those circles, and I remember, I went to this seminar, and I had been a professional dominatrix back in New York City when I was in my
Right.
20s, and it was ultimately the house where I worked was shut down by the NYPD. We were in the era of stop and frisk, and they were very like, we don't want to tell you what is legal to do versus what is not, so we're just gonna send another undercover cop and shut you down and whatnot. And in the aftermath of all of that, I was doxxed. I was, I was, there was a photo of me in the New York Post, the whole nine
Jesus.
yards, everything. And a lot of my clients turned on me
Right.
and began, attacking me. That sort of, oh, this was only just a business to you. You're just in it for the money, which it's like, please. Like, I mean,
Mm.
yes, I was in the lifestyle and I was actually very passionate about BDSM. But, like anyone doing something for the money is doing something, like anyone doing something professionally needs to support themselves. It's
Yeah.
whatever, people in magic get that all the time too,
They
obviously too.
really do. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like, right,
Yeah.
maybe even more so. Um, but there I was at a business coaching seminar, and all of a sudden, the business coach puts a testimonial from one of his clients on the big screen and says, this is someone I've helped make like over $100,000 in the last 6 months, whatever it was. And it was one of my former clients from when I was a Dom. And I ran out of the Marriott ballroom and I ran to the bathroom to throw up. Like it
Oh my
was,
goodness.
like
Oh.
this is how long,
Yeah.
like that's how long it had been. And I was just
Yeah.
like, nope. And I realized like it was so incredibly valuable to the point where I almost feel like
Right.
Spirit must have made
Mm.
those links together, because all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is why I'm afraid of having clients.
Ah.
This is why for the past, however many years I've been saying, oh, I'm going to start a business or whatever. And,
Mhm.
you know, I had written a book, I wrote blogs, I was not afraid to be in public. But when it
Yeah.
came to having clients, man, like people would write me and it would be like, if you did not come 100% correct, I would just assume that you were looking to hurt me or to,
Mhm. Mhm.
to waste my time
Yeah.
or get something for free or whatever. I had zero intake process. I didn't
Mhm.
know what an intake process was, because when I was a Dom, you didn't really need that. You
Mm.
just called
Mm.
the house and booked
Yeah.
and showed up, and you would read their little form about the things that they were into, and then you just walk into the room.
Right.
So to realize that I was like, I have an unconscious fear of having clients because I am afraid that the same thing is going to happen to me that happened to me when I was a Dom, was that makes me vulnerable when
Yeah.
I, need money to support myself from someone. That gives them a sort of power over me, which it doesn't really if you have enough abundance, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
time, being in my 20s and in a lot of scarcity, that's how I felt. And so for that to come up that many years later,
Mhm.
I was like, wow, this is why. And of course, the minute you make that conscious, you get to have that conversation with yourself and you're like, all right, Arden, but do you know how to have a client now? Do you know how to have a boundary around a transaction? Do you know that you are not selling unlimited access to you
Yeah.
when you take on a client? You are having, like, the clearer you can make these transactions, the clearer it will be. And you are allowed to turn people away, and you are allowed to just deliver on the thing that you promised you're delivering on, and you're allowed to have clearing conversations if people misunderstand you or whatnot. And so the minute, for me anyway, that I had that conversation with myself in my head, it was like, oh, duh,
Right.
I got this. But before, it was like, wow, no wonder I'm so scared to have a business. Well, look at what having a business did to me before.
Mhm.
Wasn't even my business. It was my partner's business. But yeah, that
Sure. That
that'll
makes a lot of
that'll
sense.
really
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. But how you talk about it is actually it's really insightful when with that idea of like a kind of a onboarding or a boarding process or how you kind of accept requests. And it's familiar ground, but I like how you speak about it. I think that's useful insight for me to take away, to be honest. Like, because like I get requests sometimes for like, can you give me insight into this thing that happened? And it's people being vulnerable, asking questions about spiritual experiences or paranormal experiences they're having, and invariably I really can't give them anything because, I'm not the one having the experience, but sometimes because the people listen to me, they think that I know, and I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love I have a group on Facebook called the Repatterning Parlor
Mhm.
that I love for that reason, where when people want help that I don't have time
Yeah.
to give folks for free, I can always direct them toward the group and say, ask my graduates,
Mm-hmm.
that because that's helpful for them, because teaching someone something, passing something on is also a way that we better integrate things. So
Right.
I love having a community around all that. I don't feel any scarcity at this point around the knowledge itself, because
Yeah.
honestly, it is so vast and complex that it's like, even like there's almost no way that you could like steal it from me, or whatever. And I do
Yeah.
believe that when people have the availability, like when they have the means, when they have the funds or whatever, they will work with the person who brought them to that. But in the meantime, if I can have, someone else in my group, or if I can answer in the comments in a way that other folks can also learn from, in a way that, it's different, it's a different energy when I'm answering something publicly in a way that everyone can learn from, versus
Mm-hmm.
having to answer all those questions
Mm-hmm.
individually in private or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. If someone is willing to come into the group and ask that, it's like, ask away.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
I'll have the answer for you, but maybe somebody else will. It's all about, I'm not like you yourself said, right? It's like, I can't tell you anything about your path, right? Unless we're
Mm-hmm.
doing divination or something like that. But
Exactly.
if you
Yeah.
come
Yeah.
into the
Yeah.
group, we'll all throw answers out there. Something will resonate with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a really healthy reflection. Um,
It's because
very
I learned
useful.
my business patterns.
Yes.
Finally.
And so in terms of like the type of courses that you offer, that you teach, like what could people expect from those type of courses?
Well, I have the repatterning project, which is the 8-week course. So that's the
Right.
big info dump, and I really do recommend that folks start there, because knowing the terrain of your mind body system and how it
Mm-hmm.
works, like knowing the code, right? That is really, I believe, the foundation of everything, and I think more occultists would benefit from that than from necessarily learning operative sorcery or all sort of
Mm-hmm.
different means of operative sorcery right away. You see people all the time who are in the forums like nerding out on the grimoires or whatever, but their lives are falling apart.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
if you don't know how to aim that magic toward your own self transformation, and then
Mm-hmm.
you're going to save so much time if you align yourself internally with the life that you want first, and
Mm-hmm.
then cast for those external things to come to you. Otherwise, you're just going to sabotage it when it comes in, or you're not going to be ready for it, or you're going to be aiming your sorcery at the wrong things. You're going to be aiming it out of like jealousy, or you're going to be,
Mm-hmm.
oh, if I only had that, I would feel complete. And then
Mm-hmm.
that arrives, and it's like, no, now I need something else to fill the void
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
So that is the flagship course, the repatterning project. And then the other course that I teach is Myths and Magic, which is my course in narrative magic and hyper sigils, and that is a 4-week course. It's more fun and playful and
Mm-hmm.
lighthearted, but that too can be deeply transformative. This is about the power of character and narrative and archetype, and how the stories that we tell, inform who we are when we walk through the world, and the
Right.
possibilities that we allow for ourselves. And then other than that, I have like one-off workshops that I've taught
Mm-hmm.
that range, anywhere between that typical sort of coaching, self-improvement, etc., and also, the deeper, more operative sorcery, kind of feral witchcraft stuff, and anything on the spectrum between those
It's the
things.
best type of witchcraft.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you're not wrong. You're
Yeah.
not wrong. As
Yeah.
as much as I love how sort of, streamlined sacred geometry, kind of everything logical, all causation, everything kind of lining up, the repatterning project is. I do think that yeah, when we get into the grid of it, the dirt under the fingernails of witchcraft
Yeah,
is something I think we ultimately can't avoid, and why would we want to, right?
absolutely, absolutely. Um, like you've had a really interesting life, from what we've discussed, and I see you're also a musical artist as well. Like uh, what do you think it is? Well, actually, two questions. So because I'm always fascinated by this with people who are kind of who have decided to take a totally different life, a life of kind of like their own expression to follow their follow their truths, and it's not an easy thing to do at all, and let alone make it work, right? Like plenty of people
Well,
try
the
and it doesn't
opposite
work.
is a lot harder, though,
Yeah.
especially if you're autistic.
Well, the opposite is it can be a slow death, right? Like and I guess that's a very sad thing. You see it all the time. Like people who are just like, I'm not living the life I want to live, and I never will. That's a brutal realization when you see that in somebody. But to have the courage to step out of the kind of the step off the safe path, right, and start following your own, and certainly kind of from what you're describing with like going into like BDSM, going into magic, having a career in music as well. They're all kind of they're not beaten paths. They're I mean maybe to a degree, right? They're not it's not like new ground, but certainly it's not.
Yeah.
It ain't the mainstream. What do you think it is? Kind of. What do you think it is in you? What do you think it is in similar kind of like people who kind of have that wildness in them? What do you think it is that drives people that way?
Neurodivergence. I mean, very, very seriously though, I think,
Yeah.
I was undiagnosed autistic and ADHD up
Right.
until just a couple of years ago. I
Yeah.
got my formal diagnoses, and that was, speaking of the mental health industry and all its failings, which
Mm.
is a large reason why I do the work that I do. Those were things that I had to discover on my own. That
Mm.
talk therapy back in the day when I
Yeah.
tried those things, and psychiatry did not discover about me. People throwing around borderline personality disorder or whatever, which I never officially had a diagnosis of that, but it was sort of discussed or whatever.
Right.
Um, when really, I was autistic and very dopamine deficient. And so
Right.
my dopamine deficiency has always caused me to pursue my bliss in that very Joseph Campbell kind of style, because my brain quite literally needs the stimulation,
Right.
and I grew up as a theater kid, and and my degree is in theater. I went
Okay.
to NYU and I studied theater there. So that also meant that, once I graduated, I was absolutely qualified to be a dominatrix. Right there I am with my theater
Yeah.
degree, with my starting to go on. I mean, man, like life just happened, right? I graduated
Mm.
NYU. I went on some auditions. I did some regional theater that was very cool. And then theater itself started to change, post 9/11. People were afraid to put investors were afraid to put money into interesting, groundbreaking shows. It was all
Mm.
like Disney and, Mamma Mia and stuff that was all. And I was just like, I didn't get into this to do this kind of work. And I
Yeah.
was lost for a little
Mhm.
while. And I originally became a dom, honestly, because like I was bartending, and I really was just going to substitute out my day job for something that was more interesting
Yeah.
and wasn't going to hurt my feet. And I had a genuine interest in BDSM too. So
Mhm.
although I was a submissive, but
Mhm.
I was like, well, I'm a submissive, but I know what I like having done to me. I think I could do it to other people. So
Sure.
um, and then a couple of years later, the house where I worked got shut down, and and then, it's just my life kind of went, in these directions, and after that, kind of extraordinary trauma, of being doxxed and all of that stuff happening, my life really spiraled. I and and then, a few years later, moving out of New York and being like, whatever I came to New York for, it's not what I'm doing. I'm not happy here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Moving to Los Angeles, beginning magic, and then beginning my study of magic and having all those things happen exactly as I've described, and realizing, after teaching the repatterning project that first round, like I said, I started calling it the Tesseract, because I was like, this is something extraordinarily powerful, and I don't fully understand it yet. I don't know I don't know how what it's capable of doing, and so then being like, well, I guess I better learn the business skills, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been kind of this through line, that to me, in my head, I can see all the causation, but
Right.
yeah, for sure, there's a lot of folks who are like, oh, you've done so many different interesting things, and yeah, singing and performing with my band Arden and the Wolves. I came out to Los Angeles, and really, I came out to Los Angeles to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I got here and I was like, well, I could go into writing. I had a screenplay at that point that had gotten
Right.
a thumbs up from CAA, but never went anywhere after that. I'd gone to school for theater, so I thought, maybe I'll go into acting. And finally, like, I sat down with all these sort of neurodivergent gifted kid. I could do all these different things, but I haven't really ever fully committed to any of them. And
Mm.
I picked two. I said, I'm going to do music and coaching. I want to do music, I said, because music is going to allow me to be both the writer and the performer, in a way that I felt that acting and writing sometimes felt compromised when combined.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I decided music would allow me to write my own material, perform my own material, and then if I wanted to jump into acting from there, I'm like, if you're a successful musician, you could do anything at that point. You could make a perfume or whatever, you could make a makeup line, whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
So I was like, let me try and do that. But of course, it was like, well, I have no idea how I'm going to make money at music, because music costs me money. I don't self-produce. I pay my producers. I pay my musicians.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, well, I better, I better figure out something that I'm going to do for money. And I chose coaching, because at that time, I'd been a dating coach up until that point. I'd been a pickup artist, speaking of all the NLP, ugabooga, right? That was sort of how I got into the dating
There's all
coaching
that
sphere.
stuff.
It
The
was about
game,
my,
right? That was that 20 years ago. Was it 20
yeah,
years ago? The game,
yeah,
that kind of stuff.
just about. I think it was 2007 was around when that was very
Yeah.
popular,
Mm.
and yeah, I used to pal around with Neil Strauss and Mystery and
Mm.
and people like that, and uh, and yeah, I subverted what they were doing, because all women had at that time was like The Rules and Why Men Love Bitches, and those books were just like, sit still, don't do anything. And if you do nothing at all, you can wait for a man to approach you, and then he'll be your boyfriend. And I was like, that sounds boring as hell. Also, like, the men I want aren't necessarily approaching me. They're the one who are like behind the DJ booth, or they're the ones who are, the artists at the art exhibit who are
Mm.
surrounded by people. How do I learn to approach the men who are
Mm.
like not making approaches because they're already valuable? Anyway, that's a story for another day.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so I created or rather, I set the intention that I was going to balance music and coaching, and
Right.
I figured I'll get my coaching business to pay for my music production, and then ultimately I'll use my music, my platform as a musician,
Yeah.
to market my coaching. And it's funny, this was even before the repatterning project, before before my own personal repatterning, before my own awakening. I just had this idea of, like, yeah, I want to be a musician and a coach, because being a coach by itself did not feel like aspirational to me, because I feel like a lot of people, I'm like, I don't buy that you grew up saying, I want to be a life coach. So if you're a life coach, if that's like, I already don't buy that you have the authority to tell me how to pursue my dreams, because I don't really believe that this was yours,
Mm-hmm.
with a few exceptions, perhaps, right? But for the most part, I feel like people got into the coaching boom because they didn't want their day jobs, and they are just, regurgitating other people's material. Yeah, not everyone, but there's a lot,
I get
or
where you're coming
there
across. Yes, fair
was,
enough.
right?
Yeah.
there was a lot of that anyway. So I was like, but if I can figure out how to be a musician and be successful as
Hmm.
that, well, like who wouldn't want like David Bowie as their life coach? Like that's the life coach I want, is someone who is
Hmm.
really like living the rock star dream, because that's what I want to be too. So and I'm still very much on my
Mm.
trajectory. You know, I'm not even sure I consider either of my projects officially hard launched. Do you know what I mean? It's all been in these past 7 years or so about building up, getting my sea legs and really getting into my body, and then, you know, having that that authority from being able to say, yes, I did this.
Yeah.
I achieved. But that's where it came from, is that moment after moving to LA where I was just sitting with myself being like, well, I guess I'm at the point where I should decide what I want to do with my life, and picking these two things because
Hmm.
they seem to work so well symbiotically. And I'm really glad that I did. I don't regret the other things that I cut out. I always feel like if I really want to write another screenplay, I could. And now I have magic. Like if I wanted to, you know, I'm sure I could carve a pathway in that direction for myself if I
Yeah.
wanted to. But it turns out that I didn't learn this until much, much later on, like literally just, I think about 2 years ago now. But singing itself is really inherently connected to my magic. So I'm really glad that I chose music back at a time when, for all I knew, it seemed almost on par with writing and acting and the other things that I was doing. And it turns out there is something about my own personal magic that is related to singing in a way that
Mm.
I'm really glad I picked that.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And tell me what's next for you? What do you got coming up?
Well, I've got the podcast coming out. Hopefully, I don't know when that's going to be because I'm going to tape a season full of episodes before I launch it, but hopefully before the end of the year. And it's just going to be called the Repatterning Podcast, of course.
Okay.
And I've also got an album that also will hopefully be coming out later this year. Again, I'm waiting on just the last few elements, so I
Right.
don't have a release date for it yet. But my band is Arden and the Wolves,
I
and
love
the
the name, by the
title of
way.
that
It's a
album.
really cool name. I like that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Really. Mm.
I decided I needed something to be separate from my own name for like search engine, because you know I was doing a million things. I was
Yeah.
like, I need something, but I still wanted my name in it
Hmm.
to link to me. So yeah, the album coming out later this year, hopefully, is called the Bourbon Room Sessions, and man, I can't wait to tell the story behind that. Talk about repatterning and understanding extreme permutations of consciousness, which I put a YouTube video out recently
Hmm.
that's like it's quite long. It's about 2 hours, and it's me talking about all these different ways that consciousness can be linked to a body or outside of a
Hmm.
body, and how that informs mental health in a way that the
Right.
typical mental health industry doesn't really think of. I went on a very extraordinary journey, which is not quite done yet, and which is also probably why the album is not quite
Yeah.
out yet, of answering a loved one who made a cry for help
Right.
uh, out of nowhere after over 3 years of no contact, because he was relapsing, and was relapsing into alcoholism. And despite about a decade of Alcoholics Anonymous,
Yeah.
which he was very serious about, and would wake up from that relapse and having blacked out, not knowing what happened.
Right.
And how do you know, and coming to me
Awful.
and saying
Yeah.
like, I'm trying so hard and I don't understand what's happening.
Mm.
I wake up and all I know is I drank again, and I don't know how or why
Mm.
or what happened. I have no memory of it. And you know, traditional mental health, and the funny thing, of course, was I had actually written most of the album before this happened, not knowing what the songs were about
Right.
until they happened. And there's a long magical explanation for that I won't get into, because I know we've already been talking for quite a while. But I am excited for the conversation about mental health and extreme permutations of mental health um, that the mental health industrial complex would typically rather say doesn't exist, or that people are
Right.
faking
Okay.
it, or that
Yeah.
they're whatever, than admit that they don't know how to treat it. And yeah, so it's kind of cool that my music work and my repatterning work are going to to overlap in that capacity, which I suppose
Yeah. Yeah.
they always would have, right? Because
Sure.
I'm
Sure. Yeah.
still me at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm excited about that forthcoming conversation.
That's really cool. That's really cool. And if people want to follow you or take one of your courses, where's the best place for them to do so?
Well, my website is the repatterningproject.com, so you can read all about it there. I'm also on Instagram at it's me, Arden Leigh, and also Instagram.com/the repatterning project and /Arden and the Wolves. So all my projects are there. And I'm on Facebook too, just Arden Leigh. And you can also join the Repatterning Parlor, which is the Facebook group that I run for folks who just want to hang out and learn more about repatterning, before buying a course or whatever. Just, hang out in the community when, maybe if someone can't afford, maybe especially right now with all the crazy things the economy is doing, it's like, yeah, just come hang out with us and learn by osmosis, right? Which is, as we know, a valid way of repatterning. So yeah, all those places. And then of course my band Arden and the Wolves is anywhere you can get music. Stream it all day long. I don't mind. You don't have to go to band. I'm not one of those artists who's like, you have to buy it or else. I don't fight the current infrastructure, even if it's, maybe due for an overhaul.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's fantastic, Arden. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I think you're very inspiring with the amount of different projects and different work that you do and have and execute to a great level. So I'm looking forward to following up on your album when that's out, and hopefully you can tempt you back onto the show at some stage when you start your new podcast project. Come back on and tell us about it. That'd be great.
I'd love that. Yeah, and thank you again for inviting me. It's an honor. Like I said, there's so many occultists that I respect a great deal who have been on your show, and so it was really an honor when you reached out to me. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed this conversation quite a bit myself as well. Thank you.
My pleasure. Wonderful stuff. I hope you all enjoyed that. If you want to find more about Arden and the courses that we discussed in the show, then do check the show notes below. You've got all Arden's links are there, and hopefully we can tempt them back onto the show in the future when they launch their new projects. Okay, that's it from me. I'm Darren Mason, and you've been listening to Spirit Box. Take care and talk soon. Bye.